Hello there.
General Kenobi!
I'm sorry about that. Our oldest son is a huge fan of General Grievous. Welcome to episode 9 of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. I'm sure you're rooting for our main character right now, there in the damp darkness. If you're not, maybe this modern age has desensitized you. Don't worry, it's nothing a short vacation to Belgium, some fries, chocolates and a couple of beers can't fix. Today, however, we're not offering beer, but 3 chapters again. Confrontation, Aftermath, and Rain and Fire. 2 more episodes after this one, and we're all out again. But do not mourn. We are currently writing The Voice of the Vampire, which we really want to finish as soon as possible if life, work and kids allow it. And of course we don't just want to do it the Sherry Bobbins way and do a half-assed job. And we don't want to use AI in any way. So I guess we're going to have to ask you for your patience again. Or we might dramatize the first chapter from some of our favorite novels, or do more collaborations with other authors, or more storytelling podcasts. If you have any ideas as to how we should keep our channel alive while we deal with more undead, just tell us in the comment section below. If you want to be notified of our next story in 2033, or who knows, maybe a Christmas miracle happens, and Amazon decides to send us the budget they would otherwise waste on another season of Rings of Power, make sure to subscribe and activate notifications. That way, you'll know whenever a new episode shows up. Also, don't forget about the new Hype feature on YouTube. This is actually very helpful for small channels to grow. You might actually tell your friends later that you liked us before we were cool. And since it's wintertime, we're quite sure we're only going to get cooler. So, swipe to the left or right, I don't know, somewhere horizontal, until you find a Hype button and then press that like your life depends on it. Should you break your phone in the process, we'd like to warn you that we're not responsible. If, however, you want to play it safe, you can always gently press the like and subscribe button if you're on your TV or desktop where this feature is not available yet. Know that you can still purchase the 1 hour longer extended edition of the Hounds of Hübschdorf on Bandcamp, or get it on Patreon if you join the Master Witch Hunter tier. That's the $10 tier. This will also get you exclusive Witch Hunter merchandise. If you can't get enough of our Patreon merch, you can always find extra designs on Redbubble. You can find all links in the description. Finally, I'd like to thank you guys for your creative comments. Last week we asked you to write something that rhymes with game, and we got some beautiful poetry out of that, such as: "This game is not lame. Grauwald doesn't want fame, but it's all the same to his 3 cruel masters if he wants to maim and then roast in flame someone not as tame as a gentle dame, and he does not aim to rhyme words with game." By Remy van Veen. And this by S. Thiel. "This game is certain to increase a certain witch hunter's fame, adding to Lucas's shame." Wonderful. Thank you, guys. But now let's return to Ludlov, who can still use our company in that damp cave that holds him prison. Enjoy the 9th episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. Confrontation. The third cut was the most painful. Ludlov felt the knife dig deep into his chest, splitting his pectoral muscle with an angry, burning intensity. He stiffened in terror, which only increased the agony that immediately spread out all across his body. There was only so much he could take, even as a witch hunter, and this was the worst pain he had experienced in years, perhaps ever. The knife moved up, smoothly and methodically. With surgical precision, Grauwald made a perfect 90-degree corner and dug the blade in his chest again to make another incision. Ludlov's entire chest was on fire, the pain reaching further and deeper into his entire body. He trembled and shook involuntarily and would have writhed in agony, but Svensson held him down with such insurmountable force that even that was impossible. He wanted to scream until his throat burned with exertion, but he had trained himself to withstand that urge. It took all of his courage and discipline to refrain from crying out, but he managed. He would not grant this evil monster the pleasure of his pain, just as the maiden had not granted Lucas the pleasure of her tears until her death. Still, Ludlov's monumental effort didn't even seem to register with Grauwald. The necromancer continued his work unperturbed, with a care that Ludlov had never witnessed before. Grauwald only used the tip of the knife and moved it carefully in tiny strokes, barely as long as a grain of wheat, moving along in an elegant chain, leaving a trail of bright red welling up from the witch hunter's parted skin. With each grain length, Ludlov saw his own blood appearing from the freshly cut line, growing larger and slowly gaining a square shape once more. 2 grains, 3 grains, 4 grains. Ludlov couldn't watch any longer and pressed his eyelids closed, clenching his teeth until it felt like they would break, trying everything he could not to cry out. But then a cry did echo through the cave. It was high-pitched and inhuman. It was familiar. It was Fulcrin. Grauwald's knife clattered down onto the floor as he raised up his arms in defense against the bird suddenly fluttering around his head.
What in the name of Lucas? Remnant, get that stupid bird out of here.
Grauwald had no idea it was a falcon that had flown into his cave, nor had he connected it to Ludlov. Stiffly, Svensson let go of Ludlov's shoulders and stood up. With wooden movements, the remnant floundered about, vainly trying to catch Fulcrin. Relieved to be free of the enormous weight of Svensson's grip, Ludlov tried to move. If his body hadn't been throbbing with pain all over, he would have taken this opportunity to run away. As it was, he could barely force himself to sit upright, and he felt dizzy. Even now, rivulets of blood were flowing down his torso. Still, he was alive, and he needed to act. Fulcrin had lured Svensson over to the other end of the cave, quickly darting about and shooting towards the cave wall. The remnant lumbered after the falcon and bumped into hard rock as Fulcrin made a sharp turn at the last moment. The proud animal gave another cry of victory and disappeared through a rocky door into another room. Svensson awkwardly crawled up and stumbled into Fulcrin's direction. It would be hopeless for the slow hulk to ever catch the nimble bird, but remnants didn't feel hope, nor the lack thereof. As Ludlov tried to get up, Grauwald grasped his throat with both hands. The witch hunter felt the necromancer's cold, bony hands slither, settle, and press down on his sweat-slick skin like a throttling snake. Ludlov took in a hoarse breath. Pain erupted again. His leg wound was the worst, the tear in his calf searing unbearably, the cloth tied around it now full and dripping with blood. In a deep and focused voice, Grauwald began to mutter words in a language Ludlov did not understand and did not want to understand. With each passing word, Ludlov felt weaker, dizzier, and more nauseated. His sight got blurry. In a haze, he could still see the old man, reaching for the floor to pick something up, probably his knife. To Ludlov's shock, he now found himself easily being held down by the frail old mage with a single hand. Grauwald looked strong now, strong and agile. Ludlov in turn felt weaker than ever, utterly defenseless and vulnerable. It was over for him. That much was clear. He wondered why Fulcrin had turned up alone, fearing for the people who should have joined the Falcon in the rescue. Maybe the mayor hadn't allowed anyone to leave, or maybe Fulcrin simply hadn't managed to get anyone to follow him. And even if he had, most of the undead were still out there, guarding the cave. Any would-be rescuers would likely have perished in the confrontation with those creatures. They would have died for nothing, Ludlov berated himself. His heart sank as he fully realized the implications of his failure. Now, all of Hübschdorf was left utterly defenseless. And as for Tolfmann, no one would ever find him. He would die, hidden in some cave or pit, alone until the bitter end. Ludlov tried to keep his eyes open and fought to stay aware, but he was losing the battle. His loss of blood, however slow, was causing his presence of mind to fade. He feared this cave would be the last thing he'd ever see on Hruda, and hoped the goddess would forgive him for his abysmal work in her service, despite his many flaws and his constant struggles against pride, hatred, and selfish obsession. He prayed Fulcrin would not end up in Grauwald's hands. The idea that the noble bird would be forced to do this evil Dreikunstler's bidding was too much to bear. As he resigned to Grauwald's superior force and lowered his head onto the cold floor, he felt a strange sensation. Fulcrin passed by, fluttering across, trying to distract the necromancer, who easily swatted the bird away and then turned to the witch hunter. Ludlov saw a devious grin spread on Grauwald's face as he connected the dots.
Falconry, eh? Did you think your little friend would be able to rescue you from me?
Ludlov didn't even try to answer that question, and simply watched as Fulcrin came raking by Grauwald's head once more. Grauwald lashed out at the falcon, waving his knife.
Ah!
Fulcrin squeaked and returned to the adjacent cave room, where the remnant continued the chase. Now Ludlov began to fear for his falcon's life as well. As slow and clumsy as Svensson was, the bird's energy was finite. Ludlov's companion had always shown exceptional resilience. But if that dumb brute managed to corner him, the falcon might eventually tire, and then he could be caught and perhaps even killed. In the past, Ludlov had been able to rely on divine help in the worst of peril. Now, however, it seemed like his part as a witch hunter had been played, and it was time for others to rise up and face the evil that had sprouted here in the wildwood. Nothing stood between Grauwald and Hübschdorf now. And it was all Ludlov's fault. He had been stubborn and foolish, insisting on entering this cave alone. He should have listened to the huntsman. He thought of the brave widows, Fenna and Anna, and little Florian. He thought of Weiss, unable to fight back in her condition, the good Dr. Strovald and his wife, and Fangro, the dog breeder, who lay dying in their care. He thought of Moritz and Victor, and finally, he thought of Garner. And that hurt most of all. Stripped of his upper clothes, Ludlov was starting to get cold. With Fulcrin preoccupied, the witch hunter didn't stand a chance against Grauwald on his own. Fulcrin passed by Grauwald again, his right wing provocatively touching the man's hair. Then he flew out of the cave, followed immediately by Svensson, who came lumbering after the bird at a much slower pace. Ludlov wondered if his winged friend was trying to lure the remnant out of the cave for his master's benefit, so he could take on Grauwald. If so, he wanted to honor that intention. He tried to raise up his body, but he was quickly pushed down once again. The old maniac had always been as cunning as a trained witch hunter, but now he also possessed the strength of a young initiate.
I'm sorry, Fulcrin, Ludlov thought. I'm just too weak to resist him in any way.
He didn't know what kind of spell Grauwald had used against him, but he felt feverish, as if he were about to collapse on the floor again and fall asleep for hours. No longer distracted, the necromancer turned his attention to Ludlov once more and resumed digging his nails into his throat, drawing small droplets of blood. As the witch hunter lost his strength, his eyelids lowered further and further, taking in only a small, blurry portion of his environment.
Maiden, forgive me.
He thought he heard Fulcrin's familiar cry again, and with a final surge of energy, he opened his eyes and managed to raise his head just enough to see. Instead of the falcon, he saw a familiar face in the cave that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. It was Graunacht. Only Ludlov almost hadn't recognized him. The blind man's cheek was bleeding, and he was dripping wet, most likely from a heavy rainstorm outside. The witch hunter had no idea how Graunacht had taken on the undead guarding the cave, since he would have been unable to see them, but he suspected Fulcrin had helped him out. The bird's screech sounded like a battle cry, loud, clear and close by, just behind Grauwald's shoulder. After all these years, Ludlov had learned there was a stubbornness and a rebellious streak to Fulcrin which he couldn't disapprove of because it was all too familiar to him. Graunacht apparently hadn't even noticed Ludlov's presence and came charging into the cave. Then stopped dead in his tracks, swinging his sword wildly, as if daring any enemies to approach him. Ludlov's vision was still somewhat blurry, and his head throbbed like the drums of a hornfolk longboat. For whatever dark reason, even with Graunacht's miraculous gift, he was clearly unable to see Grauwald. Perhaps it had something to do with the necromancer's age, being centuries old. In any case, the Dry Constler was sure to press his advantage. Ludlov felt Grauwald's grip suddenly loosening and dropping his head onto the floor. He gasped, hungrily taking in the air, thick as it was with the sense of wood, smoke and burned flesh. Then Moritz appeared, charging in with sword and shield. Ludlov had never seen the shield before. It was round, in the Untronian style, but the sword itself was the same standard issue Evenendalian short sword that most guards used. As Grauwald held up his arms in defense, Svensson appeared again from the side, standing protectively in front of his evil master, the blade of Moritz's sword chopping loose his cheek. A bloodless, maggot-ridden flap of meat fell away, revealing coldly grinning teeth. The remnant frowned at this minor nuisance and simply shoved the guard away with massive, effortless force. Moritz stumbled back and was caught by Graunacht right before the two of them landed in a pile on top of the game table. Moritz emerged once more with a trickle of blood flowing down his forehead. The young guard charged again and tried to hack into the remnant. But despite its slow movements, it was as if the thing that had once been Svensson could anticipate its opponent's move. It clamped Moritz's arm and twisted it with such force that he dropped his sword. Svensson stooped, in so doing accidentally avoiding the blade of a worn and bloodied sword wielded by none other than Victor, who had just entered. The oldest of the guards was just as soaked as the others, but he seemed unharmed. The small, lonely cave had suddenly become very crowded. The remnant had managed to take hold of Moritz's sword and was now swinging it at the guard with slow but immensely powerful strokes. Grauwald hardly seemed taken aback by all these unwanted visitors and started mumbling words Ludlov couldn't understand. Victor deftly avoided Svensson's strong but clumsy attacks, all the while looking for an opening to stab at Grauwald. Meanwhile, Graunacht still stood with his back against the table, his white eyes staring blankly into nothingness. He seemed deeply confused. Victor took a chance and after dodging a sword blow from the remnant, stuck his sword out to hit Grauwald in the side. However, his blade seemed to hit an invisible wall, and the sword bounced back with a clanging noise and a spark. The necromancer's mocking laugh echoed through the cave. Moritz, focusing on trying to stay away from Svensson, ducked and rolled on the floor. Svensson hacked down at him, but the young guard was just fast enough to raise his shield and catch the blow with it. With the remnant focused on Moritz, now was the time to take down Grauwald. But Victor's attacks were all repelled by some invisible shield surrounding the necromancer, and Graunacht seemed frozen in place. Ludlov himself wished he had the strength to do more than just be a bystander, but he was barely holding on to consciousness. Meanwhile, Folkrin elegantly glided around the cave, occasionally raking Svensson with his claws or pecking at him with his sharp beak. All of a sudden, Garner seemed to have come out of his state of shock and noticed Ludlov's presence. He dashed towards him, keeping his head down to avoid the violence going on around him. Svensson was still trying to bash Moritz's skull, while Victor remained locked in combat with Grauwald, who seemed to be enjoying it all tremendously. Garner arrived by Ludlov's side and knelt down next to the witch hunter.
Your presence is pale, Master. Are you all right?
Thank you, Garner. I'm all right. Thank you for coming.
Garner shook his head.
I'm sorry. I couldn't hit the enemy. I couldn't see him, or them. None of them.
That's not your fault.
Just then, Moritz managed to trip up the mighty Untronian remnant. Svensson fell down face first, right next to Ludlov, dropping Moritz's sword.
Garner!
Ludlov cried out. The blind man had managed to roll out of the way just in time and managed to locate the fallen remnant with his sword, clumsily hacking down at him, to no avail. Already, Svensson was beginning to crawl up. Moritz picked up his fallen sword again as Victor dashed away from Grauwald and came rushing into the fray with the remnant, raising his sword high and swinging it down in a graceful arc, hacking right through Svensson's neck, severing his spinal cord. It took another swing to completely behead the remnant. Instead of blood, only ashes and maggots came pouring out of the wound. Still, the thing rose. Moritz's eyes grew wide.
I thought they stopped moving when you chopped their heads off! Not this kind!
Ludlov shouted back, his voice sounding like normal again. He could deduce from Moritz's look that he knew what that meant. They had to take out the source. Wicked laughter filled the cave. Despite the fact that his remnant was now beheaded and he was outnumbered, Grauwald was enjoying every moment of this fight. Perhaps it was grace, or perhaps only the rush of his own fury, but Ludlov felt a surge of renewed energy and began to crawl upright, ignoring all of his bleeding wounds and the lingering effects of Grauwald's vile potion. Victor now returned his attention to the remnant, resigned to his inability to make a dent against the necromancer himself. The hulking brute was swinging his arms wildly, no longer armed but still dangerous. He punched Victor in the stomach, causing the guardsman to hunch over in pain and drop his weapon. Meanwhile, Garner blindly hacked into the remnant, hoping his blade would find his enemy's flesh. Moritz, reunited with his weapon, came in from the back, bashing his shield into Svensson's shoulder and chopping at his massive arms. Surrounded by enemies, the headless creature became wild and enraged, flailing his arms and punching blindly into the air while being slashed and stabbed from every direction. Finally, in a stroke of luck or uncanny skill, Garner managed to lop off Svensson's arm from the elbow down. Ludlov, however, had his sights set on the necromancer. He had been passive long enough. It was time for him to face his captor. Grauwald saw the angry and defiant glare in the witch hunter's eyes and answered it with a sly grin.
I won the game, Ludlov. I will have you for dinner.
Svensson clumsily bumped into Grauwald, causing him to briefly lose concentration. But somehow, the undead abomination recognized its master and didn't blindly attack him, even though the creature had lost its head. Grauwald began to mumble strange words again, and Ludlov felt the weakness setting in once more, even as he made his way slowly towards the necromancer. In some strange and disturbing way, he felt like he was one with the Dreikunstler, as if Grauwald's power over him had increased tremendously ever since he'd won the game. Ludlov had read about flesh magic in the past, He knew that Grauwald gained control over his victims by consuming them. And Grauwald had tasted Ludlov's flesh. In a small way, the witch hunter was part of the Dreikunstler now. As long as Grauwald lived, the madman would have control over him. Even if he hadn't performed any ritual yet, as Ludlov assumed, Grauwald would never grant him a bonus round of the game, or any other chance to change his fate. If Ludlov and his friends were unable to defeat him, they would be captured. Worst of all, Grauwald might complete his rituals and impersonate them. And if he deemed them unworthy to be among his chosen, they might even be turned into deprived, or remnants, like Svensson. Ludlov didn't even want to think about which was worse. The necromancer needed to be distracted somehow, so that his weakening spells could be interrupted.
Why won't you die?
Moritz cried out, causing the witch hunter to turn around momentarily. Victor and Moritz were hacking away at the writhing mass that had once been Svensson. Just then, Moritz managed to kick Svensson in the chest, sending him tumbling into the campfire. The thing crawled up once more, headless, missing an arm, and now burning, but still just as strong and eager to cause damage. The remnant picked up a branch from the fire and began to swing it at the two guards. Grauwald watched it all happen in wide-eyed excitement. This was the distraction Ludlov had needed, and he felt waves of renewed energy coursing through his veins once more.
Garner!
Ludlov called out. Garner understood and threw his sword. Ludlov only just managed to avoid the blade as it zifted through the air, nearly hit him, and clattered to the floor. Then he grabbed it, took the handle in both hands, and swung the blade at Grauwald's torso. But he too ended up hitting that invisible wall. The sword vibrated in his hand as it bounced off. Grauwald shook his head, chuckling like a father amused by his children's antics as he kept up his incantations. Ludlov had had enough. Rather than using any more weapons, he dashed towards Grauwald and simply threw himself on top of the necromancer. The magic shield wasn't made to withstand that. Grauwald's eyes widened in shock as the two of them crashed down onto the cold cave floor. Infused with righteous anger, Ludlov began to punch Grauwald in the face again and again, not caring how many knuckles he broke. He would continue until that devious grin was finally wiped off the insane cannibal's face. The remnant was now a stumbling, raging torch. Victor and Moritz were continuously trying to evade it and yet damage it somehow. Garner managed to stay out of the way, recognizing the thing's presence by its noise, heat, and stench. Grauwald was still grinning victoriously at Ludlov with blood-stained teeth. With every punch, his magic-infused skin seemed to grow thicker and more durable. And that horrid, self-assured grin remained in place no matter how much force Ludlov exerted, no matter how much anger and hatred he unleashed. On his own, the witch hunter simply didn't have the strength in his hands to strangle the man, and the undead Svensson was still preoccupying most of his rescuers.
My remnant will never tire. You know. You can burn it, but it still won't stop. It will never stop.
Not until you're dead.
Then he turned and called for Garner.
I need help!
Ludlov wasn't willing to give up yet. Grauwald had to be killed somehow. Perhaps if he and Garner joined forces, they could break his neck or smash his nasal bone into his rotten brain. Immediately, Garner came rushing over, drawing the attention of the burning Svensson, now reduced to a charred, smoking corpse still trailing flames from its ragged clothing. Garner sped across the cave towards Ludlov, knocking over a clay urn as he arrived. It fell, crashed and broke, spilling ashes and bones. The witch hunter glanced at the splintered remains of broken femurs, ribs, and what appeared to be foot bones. On the way, Garner had drawn his dagger. Unaware of Grauwald's shield, the blind man hastily offered the small blade to Ludlov, who was now the one holding the necromancer down. Perhaps the dagger's modest size would turn out to be an advantage, Ludlov hoped. The magical shield might only protect Grauwald from larger, more forceful weapons. A small, sharp blade might sneak through it. He had heard of such things before, but the necromancer merely scoffed as Ludlov held up the weapon.
Where is Tolfmann?
The witch hunter screamed in a last attempt to obtain that information from Grauwald's own lips.
I would have told you if you'd won the game,
Grauwald said, his tired voice still maddeningly calm.
But now, I'm afraid you're out of luck. Surely, an experienced hunter can find out on his own.
He spat out a gob of blood.
Besides, judging by your soaking wet friends, I doubt you would ever arrive there in time.
The necromancer didn't look like he was ever going to tell him anything useful. Ludlov heard the guards grunting and panting and decided he'd had enough of Grauwald. He would just try to kill him before his remnant killed one of the guards. He slowly pushed the dagger closer, resting it on Grauwald's throat, its tip already stretching the man's skin. The blade had to be close enough now to penetrate the magical shield. One strong push would have to be enough to end it all.
The hour of your death is upon you. Do you repent of your sins?
Ludlov called out, referring to the rite of execution used by the witch hunter order.
I regret,
Grauwald said very slowly, smiling as the burning Svensson threw itself onto Garner, who rolled over and wiggled away, desperately trying to get away from his burning enemy. Again, Svensson rose, his one arm searching for the guards, all the while running through the cave, bashing into anything and everything. The projectiles all missed, but the remnant did manage to locate Garner again, flailing its burning arm at him, knocking him over. Garner lay on the ground, raising his arms protectively as a burning fist smashed down at him. Victor and Moritz sped to his defense, stabbing and slashing at the remnant's back. But the thing simply ignored its attackers, now focused on a single mission: to destroy Garner.
yes, regret. I think I might possibly regret.
Knowing that Grauwald was merely trying to drag things out, Ludlov wasted not another moment.
Death will judge you! May you burn in cleansing flames! Be gone from this mortal plane!
Then he stabbed as hard as he could. But the dagger once more bounced off the invisible shield. Ludlov dropped the blade and grunted in frustration.
Dear me. Stubborn spell, that one, isn't it?
It didn't stop me from punching you,
Ludlov said, realizing in that moment that the invisible shield deflected all metal blades, but it hadn't stopped the brute force of human flesh, dead or alive. Instinctively, the witch hunter reached for an alternative weapon. The sharpest thing he could find was a large, splintered bone from the urn Garnet had knocked over.
None escape judgment,
Ludlov grunted, as he tore open Grauwald's robes to reveal his chest and lifted the bone high. For an instant, as brief as the blink of an eye, Ludlov saw a flash of thrill and excitement in Grauwald's eyes. But then, the Dreikunstler's confident grin was wiped away. His eyes widened in shock as Ludlov stabbed with all his might straight into Grauwald's chest, lodging the impromptu weapon between the necromancer's ribs right into his evil heart. Blood spurted up in a small fountain, which Ludlov ignored, even as Grauwald arched his back and cried out in unexpected agony. Still, the witch hunter thrust the bone in deeper. The old man's skin turned grey, and blood flowed freely from his mouth. He gurgled, but still, with his last hacking breath, Grauwald managed to speak.
I'm glad. I'm glad it was you.
He died with his familiar grin etched onto his cold, ashen features. Aftermath. Instantly, the lumbering, burning remnant that had once been Svensson crashed onto the cave floor and remained there, smouldering into a pile of ash. Ludlov was on his knees, in a pool of blood, watching the dead necromancer, forgetting about his own bleeding wounds. He couldn't look away from that grin, that callous, devious, superior, evil grin. How could a man persevere in darkness even in his final moment like that? It was impossible for him to understand. But even more incomprehensible were his own feelings. Instead of a murderer, a usurper, a servant of evil and a hateful mocker of the most holy goddess, he saw a man who had drunk wine, shared stories of his past, and played a game of dice with him. He saw a frail, old, weak, and lonely figure, forced to spend his days in a cave in the woods, beloved by none. What had driven him to such misery? There was no relief in Ludlov's heart, no victory or elation. Instead, a deep and wretched sorrow came over him, filling him up, blackening all his thoughts. Hot tears suddenly welled up in his eyes, and he swallowed hard. A soft hand on his shoulder jolted him out of his reverie.
Master Ludlov?
Garner said softly. Ludlov looked up.
A soul has been lost, Garner. Lost forever.
He shook his head.
It shouldn't end this way. It should never end this way.
He made his choice, Master. He was free to do so.
Ludlov nodded. The young man was wise beyond his years. Grauwald's eyes were still wide open, and it felt like he was staring with insane glee into Ludlov's soul. Unable to bear it any longer, the witch hunter closed the dry consteler's eyes, and then realized Grauwald hadn't been the only one staring at him. So were the guards. The three men stood there, soaking wet, exhausted, and battered. Victor and Moritz were looking from Ludlov to Grauwald's dead body and back, unable to utter a word. Slowly, Ludlov rose to his feet, still watching the corpse. He wanted to believe that it was all over now, that Grauwald's death meant that he was no longer bound to him in any way, and that Hübschdorf was safe now. But in the pit of his stomach, he still felt uneasy. More than that, he was deeply worried about Tolfmann.
What did that fiend do to you, Master Ludlov?
Victor asked, approaching.
You're wounded and bleeding all over.
I'd rather not revisit it, if you don't mind. But I thank you, all of you, for following my falcon here. If you hadn't arrived when you did, it would have been the end of both myself and Tolfmann.
Tolfmann, Garner said. Where is he?
I wish I knew. I should have wrested that answer out of Grauwald before I killed him.
Grauwald?
Moritz repeated.
Grauwald? From the Graunacht tales?
Ludlov glanced at the thin old man, seeming so small and wrinkled now, lying in a pool of his own blood.
The very same. He's been here for centuries.
But now it's all over, thanks to Master Ludlov of Seven Peaks,
Garner said proudly.
The Witch Hunter Order has earned its reputation.
I hope so,
was all Ludlov could say. Fulcrin fluttered over and landed on his master's shoulder.
We got your notes,
Moritz said, glancing at the bird.
Well, at least Victor did.
Victor nodded.
The mayor didn't want to let us go, but we came anyway. We left the others to guard the borders of Hübschdorf in case the cultists got there. But in the end, I suppose there never was a cult after all.
Ludlov shook his head, distracted.
And just like that, your falcon was off again,
Victor continued.
And as we were scouting the woods, he came looking for us. He guided us into this cave. That's one smart bird you got there.
Ludlov looked up. He had barely heard the tale.
Are the three of you unhurt?
Miraculously, for the most part, yes,
Victor answered.
Didn't you meet any resistance on the way over here?
Oh, yes,
Moritz confirmed.
We had to deal with more of those undead out there. Made us lose all of our shots before we got here. Garner couldn't see them, he almost died.
But he didn't,
Ludlov reminded them.
No, he didn't,
Victor admitted.
He's shown exceptional bravery too. We won't forget that.
Garner smiled, then looked away bashfully.
How did you defeat them?
Ludlov asked.
Defeat them?
Moritz repeated.
We didn't. We just followed your falcon and ran into the cave. Thank the maiden they didn't come after us in here.
That necromancer must have made them that way,
Victor theorized.
So they'd leave him alone.
Do you think they're still out there?
Garner asked.
No,
Ludlov said.
Now that Grauwald is dead, his minions will have turned into lifeless corpses again. Look at Svensson here.
Svensson?
Garner said in shock.
That burning monstrosity was one of the witch hunters you were seeking?
It was his body. Svensson's soul passed on long before we arrived.
Your friend deserves a proper burial then,
Garner remarked.
Yes, he does. And so does Brynjar, if we can still grant him that. But as much as I want to honor them both, there is a more pressing matter. Tolfmann. We have to find him, quickly. I fear that Grauwald has hidden him somewhere dangerous.
What can we do?
Moritz asked.
Look around for clues. Anything that might tell us where this maniac kept his victims.
With those words, Ludlov turned and entered an adjacent room that was darker. His open wounds resisted his every step, and he felt dizzy. There was a single candle on top of a bookcase and a sconce with a torch that burned weakly. Ludlov caught the faint scent of varnished wood. There were shelves, loaded with flasks and urns, and even a cupboard for storage. He wondered whether Grauwald had made all of this furniture himself. It all looked rather crude, but nevertheless well made, considering the circumstances. The hollow sadness that had been harassing Ludlov came to a crescendo when he saw Grauwald's empty bed. Pity overcame him, and he even considered laying down the Dreikunstler's corpse there. Then his gaze went to the open chest, overflowing with clothing items. He saw a dress, some shirts, breeches, doublets and cloaks, and he froze. Every item had belonged to a victim, a person, beloved by family and friends, stolen and destroyed. For centuries, Grauwald had feasted on the innocent, taken their lives, their bodies, their very identities. Ludlov shook his head. He had underestimated Grauwald. Even he, as a witch hunter, had been misled. There had never been a cult. One man, one necromancer, had been enough to cause all this misery. As soon as he returned to Seven Peaks, Ludlov would seek out every necromancer in Evenendale and he would kill them. Every last one of them. Still, when he thought of Grauwald, he could only feel pain and sorrow, rather than hatred. It almost felt like he'd lost a family member. Ludlov investigated Grauwald's bed. It was almost incomprehensible. The evidence that this powerful, evil wizard, whose mind had been both brilliant and twisted beyond comprehension, had slept in an ordinary bed. Grauwald could have been a normal man. A toy maker, an artist, perhaps even an apothecary. Alas, he had taken a different path. The pillow on his bed looked comfortable. Underneath it, Ludlov found a velvet pouch with some keepsakes. He emptied the contents on the hand-knitted blankets. There were necklaces and bracelets, a single earring, and a golden tooth. But amongst all the trinkets, one item stood out. Brynjar's glory ring. Ludlov decided to keep it in his breast pocket and put the other items back in the pouch. With some trepidation, the witch hunter then approached the large chest. Next to it lay a pile of even more apparel. There were clothes for men and for women, in all possible sizes. He grasped a laced shirt and wondered about its original owner. He found 2 long leather coats as well, both of which had clearly belonged to witch hunters. Hastily draped over a stool in the corner, he recognized his own shirt, jerkin, boots and coat. And to his relief, he also noticed his hat, neatly placed on a shelf. He hadn't approached his own gear yet when Garner came into the room.
Master Ludlov, I don't mean to be a busybody or anything like that, but I must remind you that you have sustained some serious injuries. Please allow us to take care of them.
Ludlov looked down at himself and saw his bloodied torso.
It's not as bad as it looks, Garner,
he said reassuringly, all the while wondering how true that actually was. Grauwald had cut through his flesh, and he was favoring one leg where the knife had sliced into his calf. Still, while he was in physical pain, his mind was so preoccupied that it seemed to distract him from it.
We need to find some information that could lead us to Tolfmann. That is our priority. Tell Victor and Moritz to join in the search.
Moritz will look,
said Victor as he came walking in.
Meanwhile, Garner and I will look after you, Master.
The guard's tone left little room for argument, and Ludlov silently gave in. His friends set him down on a stool next to the fire in the main cave and began to inspect his wounds. Ludlov felt vulnerable, stripped of his upper clothing, but somehow breaking the silence would make this moment even more awkward. The cut in his chest was still bleeding, but Victor cleaned it and bound it with some ribbons torn from the clothes in the chest.
You'll be fine, Master,
he reassured the witch hunter, who nodded absently. Despite the bandages, a throbbing, stinging pain was still very distinct.
You seem sad, Master.
Garner noted, inspecting Ludlov all over, as if he could see his mood in his entire shape somehow.
You're worried about Tolfmann as well, but that's not what I mean. I mean, you're sad. Why is that, if you don't mind my asking?
I don't know,
Ludlov said, and he meant it. He wished Garner hadn't mentioned that. It disturbed him. He still found himself thinking of Grauwald, wondering about the man's eternal fate, and his heart was still torn by pity and sorrow. He couldn't possibly care for that maniac, could he? Perhaps Grauwald's magic was still at work in him, and he had really become part of him. That very notion ought to have increased Ludlov's disgust. But it didn't. Instead, he wanted the goddess to save the old fool's soul, even though he doubted the devout Lucian would ever accept her mercy. Clearly, the necromancer had held a deep hatred for the maiden and the goddess. Ludlov could only wonder at the reason. But he remembered the way the man had spoken about his earthly mother, and somehow he could almost understand the way he had felt. But then Ludlov reminded himself of the wives bereft of their husbands, and his familiar hatred returned. Whatever sad story lay behind it all, nothing changed Grauwald's utter guilt. He was no different from the Black Sickle. The mere thought of that name ignited Ludlov's hatred even more, stronger than he had felt in years. His resolution to end them grew even fiercer. There would be no hesitation, no mercy. Nothing would stop him if he ever got the chance to destroy them. Ludlov's dark thoughts were interrupted by Moritz entering the main cave.
No evidence of Tolfmann back there. 3 witch hunter coats, but that's it. I don't think he ever came here,
Garner remarked.
Why do you think that, Garner?
Victor asked. The blind man shrugged.
Well, if there's 3 coats, as you say, 2 must have been the Untronians, and the 3rd one belongs to Master Ludlov. Any other witch hunter livery back there, Moritz?
Victor asked.
There's a large chest with all kinds of clothing. Some clean, some dirty. But apart from the coats, there were no witch hunter uniforms in it, save Master Ludlov's,
Moritz reported.
Well, that proves it, if you don't mind my saying so,
Garner went on.
Grauwald and his remnant were wearing the Untronians' other clothes, except for the coats. That means Tolfmann never entered this cave.
Not unless Grauwald hid him here somewhere, fully dressed,
Victor remarked.
Didn't you say something about a large chest full of clothing?
Garner counted.
That sounds like he made a habit of undressing his victims and keeping their clothes, if you see what I mean.
Ludlov smiled, feeling some warmth returning to his heart at last.
You think like a witch hunter, Garner.
Garner shrugged, lowering his head slightly.
I don't think they'll accept blind men in their ranks.
Ludlov frowned.
Well, perhaps they should. You have a unique gift.
I couldn't even see Grauwald.
Precisely. That tells us something about him,
Ludlov said, standing up.
If you couldn't see him, it must be because he was centuries old. After all, you said the younger people are the brighter.
Garner nodded.
True, I can barely see the eldest people in Hübschdorf at all.
Another possibility is that he was never truly alive to begin with.
What does that mean, Master?
Moritz asked, slightly disturbed.
If only I knew. But we'll have plenty of time to think about that after we find Tolfmann.
Then he made his way past the guard into the adjacent room again.
But how are we going to find him, Master?
Victor called out behind Ludlov's back. Ludlov didn't answer right away. Instead, he took his clothes from the stool and got fully dressed. His wounds stung at every moment. He also found his weapons belt stacked in a pile on the ground near the stool. He took his hat from the shelf and put it on his head. It felt like a warm bath after a walk on a cold, rainy day. Then he returned to the main cave and located the chest where Grauwald had stored his gear. Freed from any spells, the chest opened effortlessly, and Ludlov felt more confident, being reunited with all of his belongings. Ludlov turned to face the three men just as Fulgrim landed on his shoulder, looking proud and noble. Victor nodded, and Moritz smiled faintly. They had retrieved 2 lanterns, but only managed to light one of them. Everyone seemed ready to go. Relieved to be a true witch hunter master again, Ludlov felt his energy and his hope returning.
We have a procedure to retrieve missing people in the Witch Hunter Order. We start from the last location where the subject was seen alive.
Where was that, if I may ask, Master?
Garner interrupted him.
In the ruins of a small hamlet, northwest from here.
Shouldn't we look for some hidden room or door in this cave first?
Moritz asked. Ludlov shook his head.
I think Garner was right. Tolfmann never entered this cave.
Since the necromancer had given him no actionable information, he was indeed left to his own hunter skills, as Grauwald had suggested. He paused for a second.
Grauwald never told me Tolfmann's location, but he might involuntarily have given me some hints. He said something along the lines of, "You'll arrive there too late in this weather," or something to that effect. The way he said that indicates he's not in this cave but somewhere farther away. We should at least start searching those ruins.
What? In this weather?
Moritz complained. Rain and fire. Ludlov took a deep breath. As the 4 of them made their way through the tunnel leading to the exit, the noise of the torrent outside was already deafening. Arriving at the mouth of the cave, they faced a portcullis of rainfall. Like a black curtain, it isolated them from the vast, cold darkness behind it.
Saint Engelbert, it's dark out there,
said Moritz.
Just stay close to me,
Ludlov said, raising the lantern that Victor had given to him. He had no hopes of retrieving his own, and prayed the wick inside would stay dry in that relentless downpour. When they had stepped out of the cave, the harshness of the rain immediately pressed down on them. Grateful for his hat, Ludlov turned his gaze one last time towards the cave where he had almost died. It was clear to him that whatever magical barriers had once shrouded it had now vanished. In fact, it felt like any magic left was being washed away then and there by the heavy rain. Breathing in, he became suddenly aware of a change in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. It was as if a heaviness had been lifted from this place. Ludlov was especially relieved he could leave the unpleasant smells of that place behind, and welcomed the scents of the rainy forests. The guards took prudent steps ahead, as if they dreaded leaving the relative safety of the cave. Perhaps they all sensed there was more out there to hide from than a mere rain shower. As Ludlov was trying to orient, his boot hit something hard. Ready to kick at the thing, expecting it to be a stone or hard branch, Ludlov found the small box of Sancta Adalia by his feet, and tucked it back in his coat pocket, whispering,
"Thank the goddess."
Now he no longer had to tell Tolfmann he had lost his most precious possession. That was, if they ever got reunited. The way ahead was simple enough. The lantern revealed a narrow, soggy path ahead between the trees. As they cautiously made their way through the woods, they tried to stay close to the trees, the canopies protecting them at least a little from the downpour. As long as there was no lightning added to this storm, that was probably the best idea. Since they could barely move in this weather, they had agreed to return to the tree marked with the white ribbon, where Grauwald had buried the unwanted parts of his victims. From there they could find their way north and west to the remains of the hamlet where Ludlov had initially lost his initiates. They barely spoke, since the roaring of the rain was so loud. As Ludlov had feared, it didn't take long for the lantern to extinguish. He just added it to his belt and tried to make his way forward, his eyes adjusting fairly quickly to the gloom. Everything looked so different now, though, making it difficult to find their way. As often, Ludlov was grateful to have Fulcrin by his side. The falcon's animal instincts were probably their best guide. J.R.R, who was least bothered by the darkness, had taken the lead now. It was easy for him to watch and follow Fulcrin, fluttering from tree branch to tree branch, taking cover as best as he could. Ludlov had often thought about how Fulcrin travelled. Did he also fly like a normal bird when others were not around? Or did he have some magical way of traversing the air, like creating a portal or something? He could appear so quickly when he was summoned. But then again, perhaps those were the only instances when anything arcanic was involved in the bird's activities. In any case, Fulcrin had often proved his ability to deliver messages with astonishing speed. Ludlov decided it didn't matter what he did or did not understand about his companion. He knew Fulcrin cared about him like a true friend, and he trusted the falcon with his life. They had arrived at the clearing near the marked tree when Ludlov caught a strange smell in the air, which he couldn't identify. And there was something else as well. He could only name it a sensation, similar to the presence of magic, which, as a witch hunter, he was trained to pick up. There was a different quality to this sensation, though. It was stronger, less subtle, and more primal, as if the dark magic of Grauwald itself had been a mere refinement, a watered-down concoction based on the raw essence he sensed now. It was a presence, ancient and foul. J.R.R felt it too, as the guard stood there, frozen in place, ignoring the endless rain. There was a creature of pure darkness wandering in these woods, and Ludlov had no intention of crossing its path. The witch hunter suppressed a curse. They were supposed to find Tolfmann now. Not in a day, not in an hour, but now. The initiate might be dying out there, if they weren't already too late. Whatever was stalking them and causing this heavy, uneasy feeling in Ludlov's stomach, it would not lead them to Tolfmann, so it was to be avoided at all costs. The tension in all of his senses gradually increased, ceaselessly tugging at him until it became unbearable. He noticed how his breathing became heavier, and his heart rate increased. He looked around shiftily, but the endless rain surrounding him cast an impenetrable veil over the environment. Water was pouring down, pulling down the brim of his hat, cold rivulets streaming down from its sides. His clothes were soaked, his boots ankle-deep in mud. Only the balding crowns of the trees slightly slowed down the heavenly onslaught. Ludlov's comrades had turned into vague silhouettes around him. Strange sounds began to emerge from every direction. Sounds he had never heard before, sending shivers down into every bone of his body. A stifling feeling came over him, enveloping him so tightly that he could barely breathe. It was like the very air around him was grasping at his inner being, forcing him to freeze as if wrapped in an invisible shroud. It was as though an unseen force was driving all the air out of his lungs and pulling the blood from his veins. Nausea overtook him, and he wanted to lean against a nearby tree, but his strength failed him even for that small effort. Thunder rumbled in the distance.
Something's coming,
A small, terrified voice spoke. In this whirl of sound, Ludlov couldn't tell who had spoken. He stood as if caught in the web of some giant spider. Then he made out a huge shape in front of him, growing larger. The form was visible beyond the rain only because it was in a shade of black so deep he hadn't realized such darkness could exist on Hruda. The massive shadow stood out amidst the lesser darkness of the forest as a single great entity, towering and inevitable, calmly drawing nearer like a tall man approaching a group of small children. As it loomed over Ludlov and his companions, they all stood there, frozen in place, unable to move. Garner alone took a few more steps, but he was pulled back by Victor just in time. Ludlov wasn't sure whether Garner had been unable to see the creature, or the terror of its presence had simply not affected him in the same way as the others. As the darkness held still in front of them, the witch hunter felt some of the blood thaw in his veins, even if the fear did not subside. Still, he could move again, and so could the others. Instinctively, the four of them took careful steps towards each other until they stood in a row, simultaneously drawing their weapons slowly and hesitantly. For an agonizing amount of time, nothing moved or made a sound, except for the rain and the forest groaning under its relentless weight. Until the thunder roared again, louder and closer this time. Then, in a flash of lightning, their visitor was revealed. Even if only for an instant. It was enough for Victor to stumble and nearly collapse in terror. Ludlov couldn't blame the man. In the instant they had been able to perceive the visitation, Ludlov had seen an enormous skeletal creature, legless, hovering above the ground and seemingly unaffected by the heavy rains. Its arms had been twice as long as would be proportionate, and it had been clad in heavy, rusty armor, adorned with spikes and chains dangling from the sides, some ending in menacing hooks of the sort butchers use to hang up their carcasses. Dark streams had mingled with the rain on its huge body, as if it were constantly bleeding, but was not even slightly bothered by it. A heavy black cloak had hung from its enormously wide shoulders, drenched and ragged, rainwater pouring down from its frayed ends. Of the creature's head, only a pale chin and the white rictus grin had been visible, the rest hidden by a huge eyeless helm topped with two massive downward-curled horns. In both of its bony hands, the creature had held an enormous weapon of some sort. Ludlov wondered what to do. He had no idea what the deathly thing had in mind, but it was clear to him that the being had come from another realm. He tried to fight back the terror and searched his mind to identify this creature, but he couldn't think. All four men slowly backed down, gathering together in a small group, seeking each other's protection. Still, the sound of the rain muffled the voices of the others so much it was as if they were miles away. Ludlov heard his companions scream and felt his heart skip a beat as a cold, green flame erupted in front of them, permanently illuminating the hovering abomination with an eerie, deathly glare. The fire had come from its weapon, a huge scythe, equipped with two blades, one at each end of the enormous haft, facing opposite directions. The fire wreathed both blades, endlessly emerging from the icy steel. The creature didn't speak, but only tilted its head slightly, as if it held a certain bemused curiosity about the little creatures that had crossed its path.
What is it? I can't see!
Garner exclaimed, the first to utter any words since the arrival of the dreadful apparition. It was at that moment, as he beheld the scythe, that Ludlov suddenly knew. Garner obviously couldn't see it, because it was not alive.
It's a reaper, a demonic agent of death. But even in the wildest tales, they are never described like this.
Like this? Like what?
Garner asked, fear rising in his voice.
Much larger and more heavily armed. It must be a champion reaper.
Ludlov was frozen in place. He could not believe the size and appearance of the monstrosity. Reapers were creatures sent by autarch demons in their dealings with mortal men. They came in many forms, depending on their function. Messengers could be small flying creatures, like bats or ravens, whereas guardians or avengers regularly took the form of greater beasts, like the one Ludlov had encountered in the Western Wilds. He had even read accounts where Reapers looked entirely like ordinary men or women, only distinguished by an otherworldly trait, such as an unnatural eye color or a forked tongue. Only a few tales, written many centuries ago, in the early days of the Inquisition, mentioned the Champion Reapers. Great and terrible combatants, vying for the glory of their masters in the Netherworld.
Do you think there's any chance he just wants to talk?
Moritz offered. But before anyone could respond, a huge blade hacked into the ground, splattering mud onto all of them. It had not come from the front, however, but from the left, where a second creature had appeared. This one was different, looking like a female version of the first Reaper. She was thinner and slightly smaller, but she carried 2 scythes, one in each hand. The right one now stuck in the mud besides Moritz, green fire licking upward from its blade. The female's wide skull was barely visible behind a grey, ghostly veil, her head crowned with a wreath of black roses. A mass of tangled black hair hung down from under her veil, and she spread a stench of damp earth and wilted flowers. The apparition was clad in a black flowing mourning gown, ragged and torn, as if she had been a widow, brutally murdered on her husband's funeral by some terrible monster and then returned from death for vengeance. Before anyone knew how to react, a third of the creatures appeared from the right, this one seeming more bestial than the others. It was even larger than the first one, but it wore no armor, only a soaked and ragged mantle of fur draped over its excessively hunched back. Its skull was that of a boar, with oversized tusks, its eye sockets simply black holes. It only carried a single scythe, but its uniquely serrated blade was larger than any of the others. The creature remained still, but as it let out a deep breath, cold mist roiled out of its mouth, curling up and evaporating in the rain.
There are 3 of them now,
Ludlov told Garner, as the 4 of them instinctively stood back to back, facing the Reapers. He was wondering whether a 4th of them would turn up, and if they had somehow angered the autarchs who had sent their champions to kill them. Then he realized there would never be more than 3, as there would be 1 champion for each autarch who had granted his power to Grauwald. They were here to collect, and the 4 mortals were in their way.
They're surrounding us!
Victor squealed, his voice almost breaking in terror.
Do not initiate violence,
Ludlov said, as he fought back the otherworldly terror in his own heart.
I don't think any of us were about to try that,
Moritz said. Nevertheless, with clear dread in his eyes, he took a brave stand facing the creatures. The armored Reaper champion began to move, slowly raising its scythe.
I think they've initiated it!
Victor exclaimed as he pulled Garner down with him into the mud. He was too late to warn Moritz, however. In a terrifying instant, the scythe came down in a fluent mowing motion, and its green burning blade simply passed through Moritz's body as if he wasn't even there. Moritz didn't even have the time to cry out. He simply fell apart, his top half tumbling down into the mud, his legs buckling and collapsing a moment later. What was left of him briefly bathed in the light of the dancing green flames before it slowly faded away.
Moritz!
Victor cried out in despair, crawling up to exact his revenge.
It's too late for him,
Ludlov exclaimed, restraining the guard even as his own heart was being crushed.
You'll only get yourself killed.
He tried to keep his voice even, but he couldn't hide his true feelings. Another guard had been lost on one of his assignments. Victor froze as he looked up and witnessed how the fight between the champions had begun. Their scythes clashed, green sparks flashing and flying in every direction. They ignored the men now, utterly focused on each other. Moritz had simply been in the way.
Goddess have mercy on his soul,
Ludlov muttered under his breath. The widow swung one of her scythes sideways at the armored reaper, while her other came down vertically. The other champion wheeled out of the way, spinning his double-bladed weapon increasingly fast until it became a mill of green fire. The boar-skulled reaper floated in from the back, hacking his serrated blade into the other's back. A bleak and angry cry seemed to echo from another realm, and something black emanated from the armored champion, like dark blood underwater.
They're fighting for Grauwald!
Ludlov shouted.
They want his soul! They can have him!
Victor cried out, his voice still ragged with grief. Ludlov looked up, wanting to call out to the champions and tell them that he would get them their prize, but he was subdued by an otherworldly terror. He dared not interact with these beings. Instead, he turned to his friends and said,
"We're going back to the cave. Follow me!"
Then he dashed out of the way, back along the muddy pathway that led back to Grauwald's cave. Garner and Victor came up right after him. As he was running as fast as he could, Ludlov looked over his shoulder. The armored reaper and the boar-skulled one were locked in a duel, but the widow reaper had turned her head and seen them. The eye sockets of her skull lit up with green fire behind her veil, and as she spun out of the way of her enemy's weapons, she came floating along the path in the direction of the three running men. The other two would undoubtedly follow soon after. Ludlov panicked. These creatures couldn't be outrun, and they wouldn't come asking for Grauwald's remains gently. That much was clear. Ahead of him, Fulcrin suddenly wheeled and disappeared between the trees to the left. That was probably the best idea indeed, Ludlov surmised.
Get out of their way!
He cried out to Garner and Victor. Then he took a sharp turn, crashing into the thicket to the left of the path, hoping that the infernal blades would not be able to hit them in the dense growth of the forest. Garner seemed confused, but he followed Ludlov, tumbling over roots and falling down. Victor managed to pull him up and supported him as they made their way between the trees. The widow's scythes began to mow into the trunks, splitting them apart. Anything touched by the green flames glowed up momentarily, then withered and died. Trees came crashing into each other, wood breaking and splintering with horrific noise. Ludlov barely managed to avoid a massive trunk as it landed beside him.
Sancta Gwendala! Sancta!
Another name came to his mind.
Sancta Adalia!
Reaching into his pocket, he found the relic of Sancta Adalia's box still there. Clutching it, he begged for protection. The widow's green burning eyes scanned the ruin of the fallen trees, seeking for Ludlov and his friends. Just then, the scythe of the armored reaper hooked into the widow's shoulder, dragging her back and drawing her into a duel. The boar-skulled reaper arrived as well, attacking them both. Ludlov took advantage of the opportunity to crawl his way through the thicket, looking for his friends.
Garner! Victor!
A figure emerged from behind a fallen tree. It was Garner.
Go ahead, you two!
Victor's voice called out nearby, although Ludlov couldn't see him.
Get the body!
Confused, Ludlov stared into the darkness. Then he saw what was going on. Victor was prone, his legs stuck underneath the fallen trunk. Garner was bent over, pulling at him. He chanced a glance in Ludlov's direction.
Go with Ludlov, Garner!
The guard called out once more, desperation in his voice.
No! I won't leave behind another guard.
He went back and aided Garner in pulling Victor out from under the fallen tree. All the while, Ludlov kept his eye on the fighting champion reapers. He saw the green fire whirring, their horrid blades clashing. The armored figure was locked in a duel with the boar-skilled monstrosity now, but the sneaky widow was again nowhere to be seen.
Almost there,
Ludlov said. With a powerful tug, he and Garner managed to release Victor from his predicament. The guard screamed in pain.
my kneecap!
I think it's broken.
All right. We'll carry you together. Come, Garner.
The witch hunter laid Garner's arm around Victor's shoulder. Together, they made their way onward, Victor in the middle, leaning on each of the other men's shoulders. The way between the trees and shrubbery was hard and slow. Halfway, Victor wrested himself free.
It's all right,
He said.
I can walk from here. Go on ahead. Are you sure?
Garner asked.
Yes, you blind fool, go on. I'll pick up a branch and use it for support. Just get that body from the cave, or we'll all perish.
Fulcrin paved his way ahead between the trees, heading north and back to the path.
Follow that bird.
Victor said. The man was right, Ludlov thought. The sooner they got to the cave, the sooner they could give these monsters what they wanted. They would have no more interest in the 3 living men then. In a flash of lightning, the mouth of the cave became visible in the distance, beyond the trees.
Come, Garner,
Ludlov said, but the would-be guard stood frozen in terror.
I cannot see. I cannot see.
Garner said in shock.
Where are they? I can't see Moritz anymore. This is no time for panic.
Victor called out bravely.
Go with Ludlov. Be a guard, Garner. You're one of us. Now you're the best of us.
Garner's breathing grew heavy, and his chest heaved visibly with the drum of his heartbeat.
I can't.
He started. Ludlov saw the widow appearing from behind a tree, watching, sniffing curiously. Victor cried out and raised his blade.
What is it?
Garner asked.
One of the Reapers.
Ludlov cried out. He jumped in front of the demonic servant, trying to distract her, but her hollow sockets seemed to gaze right through him. In desperation, Ludlov let go of his former resolution not to engage them in battle. He thrust his rapier in the side of her ribcage, through the black fabric of her dress, and slid it back out gracefully. Her empty, expressionless gaze flickered down towards the inflicted wound momentarily, then ignored it, as if the attack had been a mere passing curiosity to this mighty entity. Then her head turned towards Garner as she readied her blades. Victor attempted to stab at her in vain, but her blades were still thirsting for Garner, who remained unaware. The skeletal figure raised her arms and crossed them high above her head, ready to slice her scythes right through the blind man. Ludlov called out Garner's name to warn him, but before he could react, his heart skipped a beat as Victor made a sudden dash and jumped in front of Garner. The twin blades came swinging down, crossing each other as they parted the guardsman's head from his shoulders.
Victor! His light went out! He's gone, Garner. I'm sorry. We've got to move on now,
Ludlov shouted back. He dashed on, almost stumbling over the twisting tree roots below him. He decided to take a chance and tumbled back onto the muddy path. Lightning lit up the night, revealing the cave not too far ahead. Garner emerged out from between the trees as well, but he was closely followed by the widow.
Garner! Duck!
Ludlov screamed. The blind young man threw himself down just as the twin scythes came whooshing through the space where he had been a moment before. Garner rolled over in the mud, watching helplessly as the widow came in for another attack.
Maiden, help us!
Ludlov cried out. Then, all of a sudden, something else came crashing out of the woods. Something massive, firmly positioning itself between the widow and the fallen young man. It was the armored maceling, its harsh, wet carapace glistening in the light of the widow's fiery blades. The animal swung its mighty tail, throwing its otherworldly opponent off balance. What followed was a duel between nature and the preternatural, of flesh versus spirit. Garner crawled upright and joined Ludlov. Together they dashed towards the cave, leaving the fight behind them. As they stumbled inside, the two men leaned against the wall, each catching his breath. Fulcrin landed on a rock, shaking the rain out of his feathers like a dog. Ludlov had never seen him do that before. It left the falcon looking puffed up, feathers sticking out every which way. The sight briefly distracted the witch hunter from all the terror that surrounded him. The cave where Ludlov had almost been slowly cut up and eaten had now become a safe refuge. Strange how quickly these things could change, he thought.
Ready, Garner?
Ludlov asked. The other man simply nodded, pale and barely recognizable. Ludlov understood. The young fellow had just lost two of his oldest friends, even if it had often seemed like they had held him in low regard. But in the end, Victor's sacrifice had surely proven otherwise. They quickly strode past the door and deeper into the cave. The torches were still burning. The remains of the fire in the middle, little more than a pile of coal with some glowing embers twinkling within. For a moment, it felt as if Grauwald was still at home, living his life. Even the sight of Svensson's burned, headless corpse strewn across the floor was somehow fitting. But then they saw the remains of the Dreikünstler, a still form on the cold floor, eyes closed, his clothes soaked in blood. Ludlov ignored the blood and grabbed the dead man's arms. As he did so, the wounds in his chest and side stung bitterly. One last reminder of Grauwald's. For a moment, Ludlov considered lighting a fire and staying here. After all, those monstrosities were too large to fit through the cave mouth. But he quickly thought better of it. The supernatural didn't hunger or thirst. No matter how long they would remain holed up, the Reapers would wait them out and deal with them in some horrible way. And Tolfmann wouldn't even get a chance of survival.
Take his feet, Garner,
Ludlov said, gesturing towards the corpse. The other man felt around awkwardly.
I'm sorry. I forgot you can't see him.
It's all right,
Garner said in a weak voice.
I think I've got it.
All right. Can you carry him with me?
You'll have to lead the way, Master. You and Fulcrin are all I can see.
All right. Let's go.
Slowly, with awkward steps, the strange pair carried Grauwald's body out of the main cave, past the door into the tunnel that led outside. A green hue painted the edges of the cave walls.
The Reapers have to be close by. I can see the light of their weapons.
Light from their weapons?
Garner repeated.
Yes, their blades burn with some kind of strange green fire.
Ludlov stopped talking when they came out of the cave. About 50 paces ahead, the three champion Reapers were still locked in their horrific battle. In the light of the green fire, Ludlov could clearly see the armored maceling, lying dead on the side of the muddy path. Why had these creatures attacked Moritz, Victor, Garner and the maceling, but never set their eyes on himself, Ludlov wondered.
Sancta Abdalia,
he said out loud, reminding himself of the relic. The item had kept him out of sight of danger, whenever he had asked for the saint's protection. That was why Grauwald had managed to capture Tolfmann, but not him that night in the abandoned village. If the guards hadn't been there, the champion Reapers might not even have noticed him either. If he hadn't lost the relic before entering the cave, it might have shielded him from Grauwald. It might have saved him from some precious parts of his skin. Perhaps, if he had truly understood the blessing of this relic, he might even have been able to keep the guards safe. It mattered little now. The combatants ceased their fight and turned their skeletal heads towards Grauwald's corpse simultaneously. Green hunger flared up in their hollow eyes.
Drop the body, Garner!
Ludlov called out. Garner immediately obeyed.
Follow me!
The witch hunter commanded, heading immediately into the woods. Fulcrin led them along between the dark trees. They ran for what seemed like an age, until they could no longer see or hear any sign of the champion Reapers. For all they knew, they might still be doing battle over Grauwald's corpse. At last, They finished their sprint at a small clearing, holding a tree for support, panting their lungs out.
God almighty! I brought them! I brought them here, Master Ludlov, and they died!
I called for your help, Garner. You couldn't have come all by yourself. You weren't their captain. They didn't answer to you. They came out of their own volition. Victor wanted you safe. He gave his life to make sure you were safe.
I always thought he and Moritz... I thought they didn't care for me. That they thought of me as just a worthless fool. I wanted to prove them wrong, you know. To prove that I could be a guard. And now...
He cried, unable to stop it. Ludlov laid his hand on the young man's shoulder.
Victor cared for you, Garner. Greatly. I just think he never encouraged you because he loved you and wanted to protect you.
I believe it too now. I'm sorry, Victor, for not seeing it.
Ludlov took a deep breath.
I want to return to that place and bury them. But first we must find Tolfmann, or it will be too late for him.
I understand that, Master. I understand.
Fulgrin,
Ludlov said, immediately calling the bird to his shoulder.
Lead us back to the hamlet with the well.
Immediately the bird jumped up and flew out ahead of them.
He understands you,
Garner said. Although strained with grief and guilt, his voice was full of awe.
Yes, he does. Fulgrin is quite remarkable.
Thank you for listening to the 9th episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf, a witch hunter tale. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get this feeling you get when you know you're getting closer to the last performance of your stage play. Only after the premiere of our last episode, you can listen to it again and again and again, and pay extra attention to all the gory, surprising and emotional details. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you still got ants in your pants, you can always go ahead and spam the comment section of our YouTube channel with your many interesting insights and analysis. The chapter that has been left out here for the extended edition is called Head Above Water and deals with Tolfmann's endeavors while Ludlov is looking for him. It's a slight spoiler maybe for those who are still listening. You can get a hold of this extended edition on Bandcamp or on Patreon from the Witch Hunter Master tier on. That's the $10 tier. And don't forget you'll get exclusive merchandise from the Witch Hunter tier on, but you can also become a free Patreon member or back us for as little as $1, which could get one of our boys a new pair of trousers, since they mysteriously keep getting holes in the knees. Must be all that crawling on the floor looking for lost Legos. As a guardsman, you'll also get access to extra story content like bloopers, the first version of Witch Hunter as a short audio drama, and the short story December by Wall Street Journal best-selling author Jack Douglas Horn. Plenty of goodies to discover. All the while you help us buy the latest epic fantasy AI-generated software. No ho ho ho! We'd rather drink whatever comes out of Mannekepis in Brussels. Still no clue. They should have beer come out of that little guy, but I'm pretty sure that's not it. To those supporting our hard labor on Patreon, we give our special holiday thanks. Amy and Dallas Austin, Antonio Padula, Peter Strandkrone, Cody H., Jogot Oer, Matt Patain, Cameron Brantley, Tony Ranico, Liam Gabriel, Mix and Match, Caitlin Bourgeois, Kadir Hussein, Yizi Dusht, Gander, Osarion, Alu, Arno Teva, Ryan Stock, Jay, Rob Skinner, Tim the Gothic Horror Guy, Johnny White, Sue Morrigan, Dustin Garner, Remy van Veen, Maisie, Hannes Fuchs, who's been a guardsman on Patreon for a while and has climbed to the rank of Master Witch Hunter now, and Jean Gerbet, our newest patron in the same tier. Thank you very much, Jean. Stick around, I will make sure your name turns up in our next story, The Voice of the Vampire. If you're still listening, why don't you all write a word that rhymes with voice? And don't forget to share all your crazy outbursts in the comment section as well. It always feels great to be entertained as an entertainer. And it will keep our minds busy while we wait for the next premiere on Friday, the 10th and before last episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. We will be available in the chat to roughhouse and goof around with, so hopefully you'll join us then. Bye!